Welcome, everyone, to Easy History Podcast. Today, we're going to be diving deep into the Napoleonic Wars, focusing on the Battle of Austerlitz, perhaps Napoleon's most brilliant victory.
Wow.
It's incredible to think that this battle took place just a year after he crowned himself emperor. Talk about a meteoric rise to power.
It really is a remarkable story. In just over a decade, Napoleon went from being the son of a Corsican nobleman to the Emperor of France. To understand how that happened, we need to look at the turbulent times he lived in. The French Revolution had completely upended the old order, creating a power vacuum that a shrewd and ambitious young man like Napoleon could exploit.
So it wasn't just ambition, it was opportunity knocking, right?
Exactly. And Napoleon was a master at seizing those opportunities. The revolution threw France into chaos, and then came the wars that followed.
Right.
These conflicts gave Napoleon the chance to prove himself as a military leader. He rose through the ranks, quickly gaining experience and a reputation for tactical brilliance.
But his reign wasn't exactly peaceful, was it?
Not at all. Warfare defined Napoleon's time as emperor. The Napoleonic Wars were a series of conflicts that engulfed Europe for over a decade.
Wow.
With France battling against various coalitions of European powers.
And that brings us to the third coalition, right? What drove these countries to band together against Napoleon?
Well, imagine you're Britain, led by Prime Minister William Pitt. You see this upstart general who crowned himself emperor, conquering vast swaths of Europe.
Right.
You see him as a threat to the balance of power, to your own interests, and the stability of the continent.
Of course.
So what do? You rally your allies and form a coalition to try to contain him.
And who exactly joined this coalition?
Britain managed to bring together a powerful alliance. You had Austria, Russia, Sweden, and even Naples all united against Napoleon.
Wow.
Of course, diplomacy played a role, but let's be honest, British money was the glue that held this coalition together.
Yeah.
They financed the war efforts of their allies, knowing that a united front was their best chance against Napoleon's military might.
It sounds like Britain recognized that they couldn't defeat Napoleon on land.
Right.
So they leveraged their economic power and naval strength to oppose him indirectly.
Precisely. And this strategy would play out throughout the Napoleonic Wars, with Britain controlling the seas while their allies fought Napoleon on land.
So with this powerful coalition forming against him, how did Napoleon respond?
He did what he did best. He went on the offensive. He knew he couldn't afford to wait for the coalition to fully mobilize, so he decided to strike first and strike hard.
Okay.
His target was the Austrian army under General Mack.
Okay.
Napoleon saw an opportunity to exploit Mack's isolated position and crush him before the Russians could arrive.
Was General Mack just a bad strategist? What led him to be so vulnerable?
Well, Mack wasn't incompetent, but he was perhaps a bit overconfident.
Okay.
He had advanced into Bavaria, a French ally, thinking he could score a quick victory.
Oh.
But this left his army exposed, and Napoleon was a master at exploiting such mistakes.
This is where Napoleon's famous corps system comes into play, right? Wasn't that a key factor in his ability to move so quickly and decisively?
Absolutely. The corps system was a revolutionary innovation that completely changed the way wars were fought. Think of each corps as a self-sufficient mini-army with infantry, cavalry, artillery, and even its own support units. This allowed Napoleon to move his forces much faster and more flexibly than traditional armies.
Right.
They weren't tied to slow-moving supply lines and could operate independently, making them incredibly difficult to predict and counter.
So it wasn't just brute force. It was about speed, agility, and keeping the enemy guessing.
Exactly. Napoleon was a master of deception and maneuver. He would use his cavalry under Marshal Murat to create diversions and feints confusing the enemy, while the main body of his army outmaneuvered them. In the case of General Mack, Napoleon used this strategy to perfection. He encircled Mack's army at Ulm before they even realized what hit them.
That might have been a huge blow to the coalition's morale right at the start of the war.
Yeah.
What was the outcome of this encirclement?
It was a complete disaster for Mack. He surrendered at Ulm with his entire army, almost 60,000 men captured.
Wow.
It was a stunning victory for Napoleon, but the war was far from over. The Russians, under the cautious General Kutuzov, were still a major threat. Kutuzov was a seasoned commander, a stark contrast to the perhaps overconfident Mack.
Right.
When news of the Austrian defeat at Ulm reached him, Kutuzov knew he couldn't take on Napoleon's Grande Armée head-on. Not yet, anyway.
Right.
So he made the wise decision to retreat.
A classic strategic retreat, live to fight another day.
That makes sense.
But wasn't Napoleon in hot pursuit?
Napoleon pursued the retreating Russians relentlessly, even occupying Vienna, the Austrian capital.
Right.
However, Kutuzov was a master of evasion. He skillfully avoided a decisive engagement, using his knowledge of the terrain and his army's mobility to frustrate Napoleon's attempts to bring him to battle.
I can imagine Napoleon must have been getting frustrated. His army was exhausted from the march. Winter was approaching, and he was deep in enemy territory. Did this pressure influence his decisions leading up to Austerlitz?
Absolutely. Napoleon desperately needed a decisive victory to break the coalition's will to fight. He was also facing growing unrest back home in France.
Of course.
A prolonged campaign with no clear victory could undermine his authority.
Right.
And then there was Tsar Alexander III of Russia, young and eager for glory.
Yeah.
He joined forces with Kutuzov, and their combined armies, along with remnants of the Austrian forces, posed a formidable threat.
So the stage was set for this epic clash at Austerlitz. 3 emperors, 2 massive armies, and the fate of Europe hanging in the balance.
Yeah.
What was the mood like on the eve of this legendary battle? Can you paint a picture for us?
Picture this December 1st, 1805.
Okay.
A cold, bleak morning dawns over the plains of Moravia.
Yeah.
A thick fog blankets the battlefield, obscuring the view of the 2 armies arrayed against each other.
Okay.
On one side, you have Napoleon's Grande Armée, roughly 75,000 strong veterans of many campaigns confident in their emperor's leadership.
Right.
On the other side, the allied armies of Russia and Austria, also numbering around 75,000. A mix of seasoned troops and raw recruits, united by their determination to stop Napoleon. The tension must have been palpable.
Sounds like something out of a historical drama. And for Napoleon, this wasn't just another battle, was it?
Not at all. Remember, the Battle of Austerlitz took place on the first anniversary of Napoleon's coronation as emperor.
Oh, wow.
He was determined to mark this occasion with a resounding victory, one that would cement his legacy as a military genius and solidify his grip on power.
So tell us about Napoleon's strategy. How did he approach this battle?
Napoleon, as always, was meticulous in his planning. He carefully chose the battlefield, an area near the town of Austerlitz that offered him tactical advantages.
Okay.
But his plan was audacious, even by his standards.
Really?
He deliberately weakened his right flank, making it appear vulnerable to the Allies.
That seems incredibly risky. Why would he intentionally make himself appear weak?
It was a calculated gamble.
Okay.
Napoleon was counting on the Allies' overconfidence. He knew they would be tempted to attack his seemingly weak right flank, aiming to outmaneuver him and drive a wedge into his lines.
Yeah.
But this was precisely what Napoleon wanted them to do. He was luring them into a trap.
So he was essentially setting a bait and hoping they would take it.
Exactly. Napoleon anticipated that the Allied forces would focus their attack on his right flank, leaving their center and left flank exposed.
Right.
And he had a plan to exploit this overextension. But for his plan to work, everything had to go perfectly. He needed his reinforcements to arrive on time, the fog to clear at the right moment, and for the Allies to fall for his ruse completely.
Talk about a high-stakes gamble. What happened when the battle commenced?
The battle began around 7 a.m. with a fierce artillery barrage from both sides.
Wow.
As planned, the Allies, believing they had a numerical advantage on the French right, launched their main attack against the villages of Telnitz and Sokolnitz.
Okay.
The fighting was intense, with both sides suffering heavy casualties. But the fog, which had initially obscured the battlefield, began to lift. Revealing a critical development, the Allied left flank, lured by Napoleon's feint, was moving away from the strategically vital Pratzen Heights.
So the first stage of Napoleon's plan was working. The Allies were walking right into his trap. But he was still waiting for those crucial reinforcements, right?
Yes, the arrival of Deviz's Third Corps was absolutely essential for Napoleon's plan to succeed.
Right.
They had marched over 70 miles in just 2 days, a testament to the endurance and discipline of Napoleon's troops.
Wow.
And just when the French right flank was under immense pressure, Deviz's corps arrived, stabilizing the situation and buying Napoleon precious time.
What a relief that must have been for Napoleon. His gamble was paying off. What happened next?
With the arrival of Deviz's troops and the fog clearing, Napoleon saw his opportunity. The Allied left flank was exposed, and the Pratzen Heights were ripe for the taking. He unleashed Soult's the Fifth Corps, hidden by the fog until that moment, in a devastating surprise attack on the heights. The Allied commanders were caught completely off guard.
Trafalgar was a major turning point in naval history, wasn't it? It really solidified British dominance at sea.
Absolutely. Nelson's brilliant tactics and the superior seamanship of the British sailors resulted in a crushing defeat for the combined French and Spanish fleets. Trafalgar ensured that Britain would rule the waves for the next century. However, victory came at a high price. Admiral Nelson, Britain's greatest naval hero, was mortally wounded during the battle.
So it's fascinating how these two battles, Austerlitz and Trafalgar, happening so close together, really highlight the contrasting fortunes of France and Britain. At this time, Napoleon dominant on land, yet unable to break Britain's control of the seas. What does this tell us about the bigger picture of the Napoleonic Wars?
It highlights the complex interplay of land and sea power that shaped this era. Napoleon, despite his genius on the battlefield, could never quite overcome Britain's naval supremacy. This meant he couldn't invade Britain directly, and it severely limited his ability to project power globally.
And Britain was able to leverage its navy to support its allies and impose a crippling blockade on France, right?
Exactly. The British blockade strangled French trade, disrupting their economy and making it incredibly difficult for Napoleon to sustain his war effort over the long term. While Trafalgar was a decisive victory, the British had been effectively using their naval power throughout the Napoleonic Wars to contain Napoleon and support their continental allies.
So even with all of his brilliant victories on land, Napoleon was ultimately fighting an uphill battle against the unyielding power of the British Navy.
It's a bit more nuanced than that. Napoleon's military genius allowed him to dominate Europe for years, achieving incredible feats of strategy and tactics. But yes, Britain's naval supremacy, coupled with their economic strength and their ability to forge and maintain alliances, ultimately proved to be a decisive factor in Napoleon's eventual downfall.
It's like watching a grand chess match play out on a continental scale with these two titans, Napoleon and Britain vying for dominance on different fronts.
That's a great analogy, and it underscores how the Napoleonic Wars were about far more than just military might. Economics, diplomacy, and the ability to sustain a war effort over many years all played crucial roles.
It's been an incredible journey exploring Napoleon's meteoric rise, his stunning victories, and the complex web of alliances and rivalries that define this era. What's the one key takeaway you hope our listener will remember from this deep dive?
History isn't just about battles and dates. It's about the choices people make, the clash of ideologies, and the unintended consequences that ripple through time. The Napoleonic Wars had a profound impact on Europe and the world, shaping national identities, political systems, and even the way we think about warfare today. Austerlitz was a pivotal moment, but it was just one piece of a much larger and incredibly complex puzzle.
It's a powerful reminder that the echoes of the past continue to shape our world today.
Exactly. That's what makes studying history so fascinating. It's not just about learning what happened, but about understanding why it matters and how it continues to influence us.
As we wrap up this deep dive into the Napoleonic Wars, I'm left with a lingering question. Despite his ultimate defeat, was Napoleon a success or a failure?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? He was a man of contradictions, a brilliant military mind who overreached, a revolutionary who became an emperor. His legacy is complex and multifaceted. I'll leave that judgment to our listener.
Indeed. And we encourage you to continue exploring this fascinating period of history. There's so much more to discover, from the lives of ordinary people caught in the maelstrom of war to the grand strategies of empires vying for global dominance.
Remember, history is not just a story of the past. It's a conversation that continues to this day.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the Napoleonic Wars. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep asking questions.
Goodbye and happy learning.